Alright guys, so I wanted to discuss something really fast, a question that kind of popped in my head within a week or so, and I kind of wanted to figure out whether or not Sony has lost their way. Everybody knows that since the PlayStation 5 has been, I guess, effectively announced, ever since they got announced to present day, obviously post launch of the PlayStation 5, Sony has been hit with a bunch of negative press. And it kind of feels like a lot of people are slowly inching away from the PlayStation brand. Now, I'm not saying that all of the negative publicity that Sony has been getting, that all of that collaboratively is going to lead to the destruction of the PlayStation brand or anything like that. If you ask me about that, I will quite simply just say no, I don't believe PlayStation is in any immediate danger. However, the type of mentality that they have been going through and implementing to their corporate structure is concerning, to say the least, at least in my opinion. Now, I do want to go through a list of things that I've prepared, obviously, and I did want to do like a long form discussion for this, but I decided to just do a more impromptu type of discussion for you guys, where I basically just have this list of bullet points and maybe just elaborate a little bit on it. So ever since that the PlayStation was revealed, it was already getting a bunch of, light criticisms, admittedly. It started off small and is progressively getting bigger and bigger as the PlayStation brand continues to expand on the PlayStation 5. And I didn't realize why that was until I started writing this list. And it turns out that there was a lot of reasons that are starting to really affect the PlayStation image, in my opinion. So first of all, it's not a surprise that that PlayStation, since its inception back in the mid 1990s, that the PlayStation brand has just been an absolute juggernaut in the gaming industry. And it's crazy because, like, even if you look at the top 10 list of top selling consoles, home consoles of all time, for example, you'll have 5 out of the top 10 being PlayStation, hardware, which is pretty impressive, to say the least, that 5 out of the top 10 are PlayStation branded hardware. And furthermore, the number 1 on the list is the PlayStation 2. Still, ever since the PlayStation 2 released, it's been on top of that list, essentially, with currently selling over 155 million consoles. That is a pretty impressive number. So if I think that the PlayStation brand is any immediate danger, the answer is absolutely not. It's going to be a long time before that happens, in my personal opinion. But let me know down in the comment section down below about that. But I wanted to start off from when the console itself was revealed. It was approximately about 5 or 6 months before the PlayStation released, obviously. And it was pretty crazy because, like, ever since that the PlayStation got revealed, it was already getting some light criticisms. Mainly because 5 months of preparation time for the PlayStation's release isn't enough for the consumers. And we saw that because of all the mayhem that ensued when the PlayStation 5, and admittingly even the next gen Xbox consoles, the Series S and the Series X, had experienced the same type of issues. But I think it was exacerbated with the PlayStation 5. The PlayStation 5 had, in my personal opinion, an even worse launch than the Xbox did, and mainly because there was a lack of preparation for the launch itself. Everybody remembers what happened with scalpers and all that stuff, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But the big thing about what I'm trying to point out here is simply the fact that 5 months prior to the release of the PlayStation 5, we only had crumbs of information with the console itself. And I'm not even exaggerating at all. Before the PlayStation 5 was released, all we really knew was like tiny, bits of information. But what we didn't know was all the big stuff that we needed to know, so that we can make a proper decision whether or not the PlayStation 5 was going to be for us as the consumer. For example, like, we didn't know when we could pre-order the console. We didn't know the release date. We didn't know the price of the console. For example, we didn't know any of the actual hardware. We didn't know what the console looked like. We literally didn't know anything. And this drew a lot of negative publicity towards the PlayStation brand in general. But again, admittingly, the same thing happened to the Xbox, but the difference between the Xbox and the PlayStation that the Xbox had going for it was plain and simple. They released the information about the Xbox Series X almost a full year before the release of the Xbox, and that was pretty imperative because at least with the Xbox we knew what it looked like, and that was pretty big difference between the Xbox and the PlayStation. And there was this weird situation where the PlayStation and the Xbox prior to the release they were, I guess, both holding back of releasing some information. I'm assuming because they were both scared to be the first ones to come out with that information, whereas the other one could rebuttal with a cheaper price, for example. Like, let's say, for example, if the PlayStation came out and said it was like $500, the Xbox could have easily came out and said, hey, yeah, they're $500, ours is $450, for example, right? And undercutting the PlayStation 5 like that, or vice versa, would have probably did some damage to sales of the competitor. So there's that. But the big thing about it is that we really didn't know anything about the PlayStation 5 prior to its release, up until 5 months before when it got revealed. And that's a pretty big deal if you ask me, because again, the consumer had no real information to go off of. And then you go to the actual reveal itself, back in, I believe it was June of 2020 during a Sony presentation that they had on their YouTube channel, and it was generally seen as a good thing, if I could be honest. Like, the majority of people that were there or even saw the reveal after the presentation, everybody for the most part saw it as a good thing, right? Everybody, for the most part thought that it was sleek and modern and it looked good and everything like that. But there was still a pretty big vocal subsidy of people that were saying that the console itself looked absolutely terrible. There was even memes about it. Till this day, there's still memes where people compare, the PlayStation 5 to like skyscrapers, for example, or everybody, remembers the modem with 2 slabs of paper on the sides, and that's the PlayStation 5. And, the aesthetic, although personally speaking, I do really love and enjoy the aesthetic of the PlayStation 5. The fact of the matter is, there was a pretty vocal, small amount of people that were really hating on the look and appearance of the PlayStation 5. Again, personally, I love the way that it looks. I think it looks sleek, modern, it looks gorgeous, and stuff like that. But that doesn't change the fact that a lot of people were still looking at it in a meme-ish, from a meme-ish perspective. And that's not counting the sheer size of the PlayStation 5, which was a pretty big deal all in itself. The PlayStation 5 is a massive thing. As it sits right here, right next to me, I have the PlayStation 5 right next to me and the Xbox Series X right next to me. And I mean, the size comparison is pretty astonishing, man. The PlayStation 5 is probably, like one quarter of the size bigger than the Series X, which is pretty impressive to say the least. Then you have what happened after the presentation, that same presentation that revealed the PlayStation 5. There was probably the biggest debacle, I guess you could say, that PlayStation experienced till this day with the PlayStation 5. The PlayStation 5, the day after the presentation released, was an absolute monstrosity of a situation, if you ask me. So immediately following the aforementioned presentation, Sony released a tweet telling gamers that they could finally pre-order the of course the much anticipated console, right? But the problem arose soon after, seeing as the tweet gave instructions to consumers that they were able to, I guess, pre-order the consoles starting the day after, right? Which was a direct contradiction to what Eric Limpel said previously, that they were not just going to drop the console without advance notice, right? And that's exactly what they did. But that's besides the point. I think everybody forgot about that during the launch, and everybody was more concerned about pre-ordering the console, seeing as it was immediately available. But since Sony released a tweet saying that they were going to, allow pre-orders the following day, the problem arose not necessarily for Sony itself, but from third, party retailers, specifically Walmart. They also released a tweet, but their tweet was a little bit controversial, to say the least. They essentially said that they were not going to wait for the next day to allow pre-orders. They were opening up pre-orders right then and there, and that created a ton of confusion to the consumers. I remember this specifically because after the presentation, I saw the tweet saying that the PlayStation 5 was going to be pre-ordered tomorrow, so of course I was preparing for that. I even went to go lay down for a little bit because I was going to go to sleep because I normally work at nights. And I wanted to get some, catch some Z's. Come to find out that the PlayStation 5 was open for pre-orders, so I of course had to rush out of bed and try to get a console. I didn't immediately get a console. I was lucky enough to buy one though on the launch day, but the vast majority of people didn't because of this specific situation where everybody thought that the pre-orders were going to be tomorrow, for example, from the day of, obviously the next day, and most people still weren't able to get it because they were already taking pre-orders, like Walmart and stuff like that, and all the big retailers followed suit after Walmart, and that just created a ton of confusion, and most people weren't able to get a console on launch day, and that's really, really unfortunate. But probably the hardest pill to swallow so far out of all the debacles that was going on with Sony and the PlayStation brand in general is probably the price of the games itself. Going from $59.99 to $69.99, $10 more, it doesn't sound like a substantial number until you start trying to add up all the video games that come out a year and which video games you have to play and stuff, and it really, really adds up. Not to mention that, $60 and $70 do feel different on the consumer end, right? $10 increase in price for video games is a lot, especially when you have the competition having something like Game Pass. Of course, I'm talking about Xbox Game Pass, that has been putting, big titles day one, especially first party titles, on that service for, effectively being free if you pay for the subscription. So I guess, of course, it's not technically free, but it's free if you're not expecting to have a title put on the service, of course. But yes, I know and understand that it's not actually technically free, but it's still, what would you rather pay, $10-15 for Xbox Game Pass or $70 for one video game on the PlayStation side? The price of video games on the PlayStation side is really bad in general. Now, there is a thing that I wanted to bring up with this. I do think that there is hope for PlayStation in this department specifically, mainly because they can answer to Xbox Game Pass pretty easily, in my opinion. Now, this is just my opinion. I would like to know what your opinion is down in the comment section, but to answer Xbox Game Pass, I think Sony, all they have to do is combine PlayStation Plus and PlayStation Now, raise the price of the service from $10 to $15, and that extra $5 increase would be to compensate a little bit for putting first-party titles on the service day one. You know, doing this would have an instant response to Xbox Game Pass, and I think a lot of people would be very, very happy. And I don't think anybody personally would complain if there was a $5 increase in price for the service, seeing as they're getting an immense value out of all of, you know, out of the PlayStation brand. I think $15 is the sweet spot for having PlayStation Now and and PlayStation Plus combined with first-party games, and it will save people a lot of money in the long run and have steady revenue for PlayStation. I think that would probably be the best idea for Sony, but I don't know. Let me know down in the comment section down below what you guys think would be your personal response to Xbox Game Pass if you guys were in Sony's position. I think that's my response personally, but I would definitely like to know what yours is. But that's everything that I could personally remember. I'm sure there's more stuff to add on to this, but that's everything that happened prior to the release. Post-release was a whole different monster, to say the least, because a lot of big things happened post-release as well. So of course, starting off, you know, the console itself launched November 12th of 2020, if I remember correctly, and I was lucky enough to get the console, so I'm very, very happy that I got it the day of, and I got all of the Let's Plays that I've started on my Let's Play channel. Link in the description for that, by the way, if you guys want to follow some of my Let's Plays. But it came to find out that once the PlayStation 5 released, that there was a difference in build between PlayStation 5s. You know, there was this French outlet, and I'm not going to pronounce this properly, so I'm just going to try it, and if I'm wrong, definitely correct me down in the comment section. But a French outlet called Les Numériques, something like that, they ended up taking apart a series, I think it was like 5 different PlayStation 5s, and they found out that PlayStation 5s were not built the same. Effectively, you have either PlayStation A that has a fan, has a different fan than the PlayStation B. Specifically, if you have, you know, let's say PlayStation you know, A, it could potentially have 23 fins on the fan, which would effectively be the quieter version of the PlayStation 5, or you can have, you know, PlayStation B that has the different fan on it that has 17 fins, and that one is inherently a little bit louder than the aforementioned, you know, PlayStation, and that is pretty significant. It is important to say that both fans in the PlayStations are still substantially more quiet, quieter than than its predecessor, the PlayStation 4. But still, even with all of that taking into consideration, the fact that there's 2 different PlayStations builds is pretty weird, to say the least. Some people will have a louder PlayStation 5 than other people, with no way to differentiate between the two, which is probably the most curious thing about everything, because that same French outlet, Les Numériques or something like that, they also determined that they had different fans in the PlayStations, but the series in the serial numbers and the build quality other than that was exactly identical, which makes them indistinguishable from the outside looking in. Now, there is a thing you can do. You can open up the PlayStation 5 and look for yourself, and you can easily swap out the fans if you were to get your hands on the 23 fin fan. If you have the 17 fin and do that, that would be an option. But the problem is that you don't really, you still have to put in all the work yourself. So that is a pretty interesting approach by Sony. Probably not in the good way, seeing as, you know, I would assume half the population that has the PlayStation 5 are going to have the lesser fans. I haven't even taken apart my PlayStation 5 to determine whether or not I have the 23 or the 17 fin. But my PlayStation 5 is pretty quiet, so if I had to take a guess, I probably have the 23 Finn, but I probably should check that out at some point. But that's just me. I just don't like to open up my consoles. It's just, I don't know, I just feel weird doing that. But there's that. Then you have another situation that happened, you know, post-release, of course, after the PlayStation 5. And that is that the PlayStation, it came to find out that they were effectively spying, I guess you could say. At least that's what everybody was saying. They were making accusations that Sony and the PlayStation brand was spying on the community due to their anti-cheat or anti-bullying rules that they have implemented on this next-gen console. Sony did come out later and clarify that they were not going to be actively spying on people, that it was just a countermeasure to bullying and hatred and stuff like that on, you know, on the PlayStation servers and, you know, the PlayStation network. But even with all of that, people generally don't like being spied on, and it did create the feeling that people were getting spied on by PlayStation, because effectively what they did is that they were recording, I believe it was like 5 minutes or something like that worth of audio for every report that was going in or something like that. I can't remember the exact specifics of that, but the fact of the matter is they were recording a pretty substantial amount of I guess, you know, voice content from people using the service, and that really led a lot of people to question the intentions of Sony. But again, I do want to emphasize that Sony did come out at a later time and reassure people that it was just for anti-cheat, for anti-bullying and stuff like that. So, I mean, take that with a grain of salt though. I don't know if I trust big companies with your information, you know what I mean? It's very hard to go down that rabbit hole, if you ask me. But that whole anti-cheat stuff probably isn't a huge deal to most people. I think most people would be fine, seeing as they're, for the most part, not bullies. Which, by the way, I really hate bullies with all my heart. But, so I think most people on that front would probably be a little bit better. But yeah, there's also the whole conversation with, you know, video game preservation and backwards compatibility and all that stuff that's really been plaguing the PlayStation brand, you know, recently. And I do want to say recently because it is a fairly new concept that people have been discussing. Probably started like midway through the previous gen consoles, and it's still plaguing, you know, the PlayStation brand today. People are wondering why they don't have a response for backwards compatibility. Now, it is important to say that the PlayStation 5 does have backwards compatibility with the PlayStation 4 for the vast majority of video games, but it pales in comparison to the Xbox, where the Xbox can literally go back to the original Xbox, which is pretty impressive to say the least. Now, it is important to say that the Xbox cannot play every video game backwards compatible, but a good significant chunk of them you can, whereas PlayStation can play the vast majority of PlayStation 4 games, but can't play, you know, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 2, or even PlayStation 1 games on, you know, for backwards compatibility. That is a pretty big thing, if you ask me. And I don't know, I think that's something that Sony really needs to rectify, or at least have a response, because that's probably going to be one of those things that's going to affect Sony in the long run. Because the only thing that's going to happen is that they're just going to continue comparing Sony's PlayStation with Xbox's or Microsoft's Xbox, and eventually people are going to start realizing that you're getting a lot more value on the Xbox side than you are on the PlayStation side. And I don't know, that's a discussion that's going to continue evolving as, you know, the years continue to pass. But after the PlayStation 5 release too, people were starting to get, I guess, hardware issues where people were playing some backwards compatible games on for the PlayStation 4 on the PlayStation 5, but they were getting some strange artifacting and, you know, sometimes completely crashing their systems, their PlayStations and stuff like that. And come to find out that when this stuff started to arise, it blew up all over social media and the internet and everything like that, and everybody was calling it the modern red ring of death, for those of you guys who remember the 360 era. But it turns out that the vast majority of people's PlayStations were just fine, and it was only affecting a very small amount of people. But the publicity itself was pretty damning, to say the least, because it was everywhere, and it was for, you know, fundamentally negative press. And Sony never really responded to that, at least not that I'm aware of. But it really, you know, took, I guess, the negative publicity to a new level with that one. But again, it only affected a very small amount of consoles, and it was blown out of proportion because that's exactly how the internet is, unfortunately. And I don't know, it's pretty a bad situation though, when the internet can control so much of your product's influence, right? But there is that's probably not the biggest thing here though. It's probably, if you ask me, the smallest negative publicity that Sony really was hit by, because frankly speaking, the vast majority of them were just fine. It was just the internet being the internet, right? But a better criticism is probably the lack of functionality and next-gen features on the console itself. They did have a couple of things, like of course the cards on the PlayStation, and the operating system was a lot better, more efficient, and the fact that it was going off of an SSD made everything so fluid, and you know, it's a nice experience. But it did lack a lot of next-gen features. Like a good example is the fact that till this day, the M.2 SSD edition that you can drop in there is still turned off, and we haven't heard anything about when it will be turned on, because I want to put an M.2, probably like a 2 terabyte on my PlayStation 5, because my hard drive was filled up probably like 30 minutes after I opened up my PS5. I literally had allocated all of my hard space, my SSD space on my PlayStation 5, because it only has like 665 or something like that usable hard space on your SSD, which is nothing, especially in the era where like one Call of Duty game is over 100 gigs of content of hard space. That's literally like 5 Call of Duties, and then your hard drive is full. That's horrible, and Sony really should have thought about that a little bit better, in my opinion. And to be fair, Xbox is not much better, but they do have more usable space than the PlayStation, which is another weird thing in the difference of approach between the PlayStation and the Xbox. But there is light at the end of this tunnel though, because there is more features that did not release with the PlayStation 5, like having the ability to plug in an external USB drive where you can save games and stuff like that. And the thing about that is that although it didn't launch with it turned on, it has recently been turned on, so you can now save games on an external like a USB drive. And there's that, you can't play video games off of that drive, at least not PlayStation 5 that I'm aware of, games, but you can transfer now from an external drive to your PlayStation and vice versa. So there is light at the end of that tunnel. Things are starting to slowly get turned on, but again, the PlayStation was lacking a lot of features, and a lot of people actually started questioning whether or not the PlayStation 5 and even the Series X was ready for release, because the Xbox is, seeing a lot of the same issues in terms of their consoles, right? But the good thing is that they have patched in some of the features, and that's a good thing in my opinion. It's just not a good thing that it released with lacking features. Something that cannot be patched in, however, is a big issue that Sony has been seeing recently, and that is DualSense drift. It is basically the same thing that Nintendo was seeing with their Joy-Cons, with Joy-Con drift. But for those who don't know, drift is, I guess for lack of, a better explanation, drift is when the video game through your monitor or your television is starting to see input from your controller, even though your controller is not being, moved or used. And to be fair, any controller can see drift given age of the controller and given the fact of whether or not the controller has been damaged or anything like that. You can get stick drift. However, the problem is arising at the simple fact that it's a brand new console and the PlayStation 5 is already seeing stick drift with the DualSense. So it's basically another Joy-Con drift situation. The positive thing about this is that stick drift is covered by the PlayStation insurance, but of course the downside to that, the positive immediately gets counteracted by a negative, just by considering the fact that you still have to be without a controller for the time that it takes for you to send it to Sony, have them fix the controller, and then send it back to you. So you can probably be without a controller for weeks, even potentially a month, depending on how much work they have over at their facilities, which is a pretty big deal if you only have one controller, right? Nobody wants to be without a controller because that effectively bricks the console. You can't use the console if you don't have a controller. And that is a very, very big problem with the PlayStation's DualSense controller. And I want to make it perfectly clear, the DualSense is a remarkable controller. It is probably one of my favorite controllers, period. The functionality and the features that the DualSense has are second to none in my opinion. It is a fantastic controller, but stick drift is definitely a point of concern, although mine is not experiencing stick drift at all. So there's that. But to more recent issues, and I think this is one that everybody in the gaming, that's in the news circle or sphere of, the gaming world has heard at some point, and that is the whole situation that's happening with PlayStation's, I guess, outlook of business in terms of video games. Specifically, this is obviously going to be a condensed version of this. It's not going to be a full, info dump on you guys so that you guys can know everything that's going on with the situation. There's a lot of news channels out there that have already covered all of this stuff pretty well, in my opinion. So if you guys want to know the specifics, definitely go check some of those videos out. But I'm specifically talking about the whole situation with Days Gone 2, where they effectively pitched a video game or a sequel to Days Gone to Sony. They rejected it and effectively killed off the franchise. Hopefully that's a little over exaggeration, because I would like to see a Days Gone 2. I do want to play Days Gone, the original one, on my Let's Play channel, so if you guys want to see that, definitely go ahead and subscribe to that channel. A link to that is in the description. I would greatly appreciate that. I'm trying to grow all of my channels at once, so if you guys could do that, I would greatly appreciate it. But what made this situation worse isn't necessarily that it was that Days Gone 2 got canned, I guess. It's the fact that PlayStation decided to go and invest their resources on a Last of Us, the original Last of Us. Not a remaster, but a remake, which was kind of weird of a decision in my opinion, seeing as I think everybody can unanimously say that The Last of Us is a fantastic game. But the fact that it got a remastered version for the PlayStation 4 and holds up pretty well, people started to question whether or not it was a smart idea to dump a bunch of resources to a Last of Us remake instead of a Days Gone 2, especially seeing as the fact that The Last of Us is still a relatively recent game. It was a previous gen game, right? It's a remastered version on the PlayStation 4 that, again, it holds up pretty well. The remastered version is only 7 years old, and the regular version on the PlayStation 3 was only 9 years old. So the fact that this game that holds up well is being prioritized over a sequel to a game that wasn't universally praised. It did have overall good reviews, but it wasn't one of their flagship titles, I guess you could say. Everybody can unanimously, as far as the reviewers go, they can unanimously say that the game was just okay. It wasn't a bad game, but it wasn't, revolutionary in any way. I haven't personally played the game. I do want to, but the fact that everybody unanimously says the same type of stuff as the fact that Days Gone was just a pretty average good game pretty much tells me that this game, the Days Gone, would have been a perfect candidate for a sequel to improve upon their premise in the game, right? Which I think they should have done, to be honest. They should have prioritized Days Gone over the Last of Us remake, but we all know why they're doing it. The Last of Us is getting a TV show getting made out of it, and of course they're gonna want to capitalize off of that on the video game, side of everything. They saw what happened with The Witcher. It boosted up the game sales of The Witcher 3, and Sony is gonna want to do exactly that. And frankly speaking, I don't think it's a bad idea. I just think they should have prioritized Days Gone instead of The Last of Us remake. Especially, again, I'm going to emphasize this a lot, especially as that The Last of Us still holds up really well in the remastered form on the PlayStation 4. They would have still sold millions of copies, and that's a shame because I would have preferred to see Days Gone 2. Let me know down in the comment section about this, though. I would like to know what your opinion is, whether or not you guys would have preferred Days Gone, a sequel for Days Gone, or a Last of Us remake. But yeah, then it goes further into the negative publicity with recent news that the PlayStation was going to be shutting down the PlayStation Portable or PSP, the PS Vita, and the PlayStation 3 stores, which was a decision that kind of baffled everyone, to be 100% honest. The PSP was understandable because it is a very, very old console, but the PlayStation Vita still had a lot of life to it because a lot of people really enjoyed the Vita even though it didn't sell well. And that's not to say the PlayStation 3 is still a good console, and frankly speaking, it has a lot of games that you can't play anywhere else. At least not right now. Hopefully Sony rectifies that situation, but yeah, it was very baffling. Then it got worse when we found out as the consumers that developers were still making video games for the PS Vita, and even went as far as purchased, dev kits for the PlayStation Vita mere months before the announcement that Sony was going to be shutting down the stores, right? That was a pretty big deal because it was clear and evident that Sony had no communication with some of their, outside of the sphere developers, and that was a shame. Luckily though, this little tidbit of information really does have a great outcome at the end of it. It seems as of now that Sony may have heard the cries of the consumer and decided to reverse the decision that they were going to be shutting down the stores for the PlayStation Vita and the PlayStation 3. The PSP is still going to be shut down, but the caveat to that is that most of the games are purchasable on the PS Vita anyways for the PSV, so it's not very hard hitting at the fact that they're shutting down the PSV, right? So there's that. On top of that though, it is pretty important to say that in the, I guess, letter that they posted on their website, they did say that they heard our cries and they started to see how important, you know, game preservation and backwards compatibility is to the consumers. So I kind of have a question. It's like, what does that mean? Right? Like, does that mean they're going to be taking that a little bit more seriously and investing more money on backwards compatibility? I can only hope, but I'm not going to be holding my breath anytime soon, seeing as, you know, it's a big company, and at the end of the day, they're going to want to make monies, right? Monies for days. But yeah, there's that. Then there's the whole situation that's still relatively brand new, right? The whole CMOS situation that's going on right now with the PlayStation 4 specifically, but it raises questions on the for the PlayStation 5, right? So for those that don't know, the CMOS is basically a semiconductor, hence the S in CMOS, that stores some of the BIOS settings in the console of the PlayStation 4. Specifically holds, you know, things like the time and stuff like that that are tied into the PlayStation network. So that led to a lot of questions on whether or not the console would work without the CMOS battery in there. And the simple answer was no. The PlayStation 4 is effectively bricked if you remove the CMOS, or if it was to die, which they do have a, you know, a ticking time for it to die, right? But also, it also led to the question on whether or not the PlayStation 4 or 5 was going to see a similar situation out of that. There has been some testing done about it, and for the most part, it came to find out that you remove the CMOS battery out of it and your digital games are effectively bricked. So if you own a PlayStation 5 digital edition, your console is pretty much bricked if the CMOS was to die. But it kind of seems like the PlayStation 5 would still operate, at least to a certain extent, because some physical games still work without the CMOS in it. That is kind of still recent development though, so don't just take that as a grain of salt. I don't think every game is going to work, if you ask me. I think a decent chunk of them are going to work, but I have heard recently that PlayStation itself is investigating this whole situation, so let's hope that they're going to patch in a fix to this, to not just the PlayStation 5, but even the PlayStation 4, because there's a lot of great video games on the PlayStation 4. But of course, I'm going to definitely be keeping my eye open on this specific piece of information, because I do love my video games, and I do believe in, you know, video game preservation. I don't want to buy something and then find out in 10 years that, should I have nostalgia and want to go back and play a video game, that I can't because, you know, it's gone effectively, just because I decided to buy it digitally, which is not a good thing in my opinion. But nothing really has plagued the 9th generation of consoles more than on the PlayStation 5 specifically, more than the supply. 5 months later, and the PlayStation 5 is still nowhere to be found. Again, I've said this previously, I was one of the lucky ones to get a PlayStation 5 on launch day, and I was able to pre-order it the day of the pre-orders open, right? And it was, even with that tidbit of information, I still had an extraordinarily hard time getting the PlayStation 5. I was refreshing, pushing F5 over and over and over again until the PlayStation 5 became available, and then I acted quickly to purchase my console. It took me literally hours to do, but I was able to do it. But I was lucky. And that is a shame, because millions of people out there still haven't gotten their PlayStation 5s. That's pretty sad in my opinion. The supply is a very, very big issue for the PlayStation. So that's probably a good issue to have though if you're Sony itself, because that just basically ensures Sony that if they make a console, a PlayStation 5, that the sale of that console is going to be easy, right? Which means that their flow of consoles is going to be efficient and always going to be guaranteeing sales for Sony. But where the problem really arises, and Sony should take notice, is the fact that consumers may not be getting the PlayStation 5s. The whole supply issue led to a situation where scalpers effectively have reins over the supply. As soon as the PlayStation 5 is available to the consumers, scalpers jump into it and basically hog up a good chunk of the PlayStation 5s and sell them at an extraordinarily high markup, right? Sometimes 4 times the price of the PlayStation. I've seen PlayStations go for $2,000, PlayStation 5s for $2,000, and that is a horrible thing to see, to be honest. But the reason why Sony should be interested in this is that if they're selling consoles, right, they're not selling them for profit. They're selling them with a loss. In other words, they, like, say it costs $600 for the PlayStation 5 to produce. They're charging $500, so they're losing $100. I'm not entirely sure how much they're losing per console. I was just using that as an example. But they're losing money for every sale of the console, and where they're getting that money back is in software sales, like video games, for example. So whenever they sell Demon Souls for the PlayStation 5, they're cutting down on the amount of money that they're losing. Because of that, right? They're making their money in profit from video game sales, not from the console sales. The reason why I bring that up is because if people are scalping and hoarding all of these PlayStation 5s, they're not necessarily going to the consumers. That is a pretty big deal, because if the consoles are not in the hands of consumers, then those consumers are not buying video games, and essentially making the profit ratio for Sony extremely low. And that should be very concerning for Sony, because they should be trying to get the consoles in the hands of people that are going to actually be playing video games, right? Because the gamers are going to buy video games, and that makes Sony money. So this is admittingly a problem that's plaguing the Xbox as well, but probably not as bad as the PlayStation, because as of right now, the PlayStation, at least in my observation from looking at all of this, the PlayStation 5 seems to be the console that people generally want more. But yeah, that's a horrible situation, man. It's probably the worst thing about the 9th generation of consoles thus far, is the fact that there is no supply to compensate for to match the demand of the consumer. So to conclude, I kind of wanted to see re-ask the question, has Sony lost their way? And for lack of better words, I think the answer to that is yes. They have lost their way, but I think most of the situation with that is that Sony has a philosophical issue from the corporate perspective. They have a corporate philosophical view that needs to change for Sony to get back to where they were before, right? Everybody remembers, I can't remember his name for some reason, but the previous, guy that was in charge of the PlayStation brand, paraphrasing here, said that the games don't have to make them millions of dollars, because what the heart and soul of PlayStation is with making video games, right? And Sony seemed to have forgotten that, because all they're looking at doing is making these big blockbuster games where, admittingly, they're phenomenal, fantastic games. But in doing that and focusing on just one thing, they're killing off their soul, the soul of the PlayStation, and long-term wise would affect Sony and the PlayStation brand pretty substantially, in my opinion. In the short term and even mid-term, they're probably going to be fine. They're a massive, company in the gaming sphere, so I don't think they're going to go anywhere anytime soon. All they need to do is change their philosophical perspective from the corporate view. right? And a good thing to consider is the whole situation with the PlayStation, the PSP, the PS Vita, and the PS3 stores. The fact that they heard the cries of the consumers and pivoted back to something a little bit more favorable for the consumers by deciding to not close the stores of the PlayStation Vita and the PlayStation 3, they effectively gained some positive publicity from the whole situation. So they can literally get their soul back by simply just changing and pivoting back to something more favorable from the consumer's perspective, right? Focus on backwards compatibility. Give us an answer to, give us your version of your answer to Xbox Game Pass and things like that, so that we can start trusting the company again. Because frankly speaking, Sony has been making a lot of questionable moves, to say the least. And again, I want to emphasize the fact that I love PlayStation. I do. I love Xbox. I love my Nintendo Switch. I just love gaming, right? Has nothing to do with PlayStation, me hating PlayStation or anything like that. I love PlayStation, and I'm considering this a discussion because I want to know your input down in the comment section and whether or not you believe Sony has lost their way and what they should do to get it back if they have lost their way in your perspective. I think all they got to do is pivot. But let me know down in the comment section down below. That's going to go ahead and do it for this video, guys. It's a longer one. I'm closing into an hour now. It's definitely a longer discussion, but one that I had an absolute blast typing and, coming up with this and stuff like that. Is different type of content for me. So let me know down in the comment section as well if you guys enjoyed it. I hope you did. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel as well if you're not already subscribed, because it really does help this channel grow. Also, in the description down below, there is a link to the other channels that I have. So do me a favor, go over there and subscribe to those as well, because I'm trying to grow my channels. So with that being said, I will definitely catch you guys in the next one. Deuces.